Today's Avenues to Opportunity Conference is hosted by Arizona State University Center for the Study of Economic Liberty, which is part of the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. I'd like to acknowledge Paul Carice, who is the director of the school and who has been a strong supporter of the center and its programming. And thank you, Paul. Paul actually is stepping out of the chair of the directorship here in a little bit. And it's also my opportunity to say thank you, Paul, for the support you've given. The conference is also supported by funds provided through the school from the Bradley Foundation located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The center's mission, the Center for the Study of Economics mission, is to evaluate the contribution of economic liberty to human betterment. Our goal is to advance research that affects liberty-enhancing policy, increases public and academic awareness of the history and philosophy of economic liberty, and leads to more voluntary, bottom-up governance. Those of you who have been at any of our events will have heard that little spiel a number of times and probably can say it by heart by now anyway, yourself. We do that through a variety of events, single events, the Doing Business North America project, which is sort of the inspiration for this conference, and other activities. In this conference, we bring together a culmination of ideas for this event that have actually been ongoing for about 4 to 5 years. And we were originally planning on having an Avenues to Opportunity conference just before COVID started. So our plans for that got sidetracked, and then coming out of that, the delays that have come out of that for being able to do these kinds of public events. And so we really appreciate the support that we have had. I'm looking to see if Mason is here. Oh, you're right. You're so close to me that you. I want to do the video, so you're going to take care of that. So we have a short welcome video from Juan Ciscomonte, the 6th Congressional District representative for Arizona, representing Tucson.
Hi everyone, this is U.S. Congressman Juan Ciscomonte, proudly representing Arizona's 6th Congressional District. Although I'm sorry that I can't be with you all in person today, I wanted to welcome you all to ASU's Avenue to Opportunity Conference. I'm grateful for the invitation to share a few words with you all today, even if I'm a proud U of A alumni, so bear down. Now, if you're still listening after that last comment, I want to tell you a few more things. Many of you may know my story. I immigrated to the United States with my family when I was 11 years old. As the first naturalized citizen from Mexico to represent Arizona in Congress, I am a proud product of the American dream. My family and I have been living the American dream, and our decision to immigrate here to the United States was rooted in opportunity, and the American value of economic liberty afforded to us through the unique opportunities we have here in the United States. This is something I witnessed time and time again while I was working with the Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. As a partner to growing businesses big and small, I saw what happens when we both in the community and also in government lift up our job creators. They are the economic engine for local, national, and global markets. We must be careful about any burden or regulation we put on our economic drivers, like our small businesses, our entrepreneurs, and also just the general workforce. What we can do is get the government out of the way. This means prioritizing legislation that cuts bureaucratic red tape, lowers taxes, and brings down the cost of goods. We also need to prioritize the health of our small business community. Here in Arizona, over 99% of businesses are small businesses, which employ over 40% of the workforce. A strong small business community has a widespread impact, empowering families, boosting economic opportunities, and improving our communities as well. In Congress, we must prioritize finding bipartisan, common sense solutions to ensure the prosperity of our small businesses. That can look in a variety of ways. For example, from increasing rural broadband for e-commerce or easing access to capital for an entrepreneur. I always say that our government does not create businesses. It creates an environment for businesses to go out and thrive. As we focus on solutions to do that, conversations like the ones that you're having here today at this conference are crucial. Events like these facilitate discussions and shape ideas that often take life in legislation and policies that our lawmakers like myself can go ahead and implement. By bringing together a diverse group of speakers, participants, and perspectives, you're driving meaningful conversations rooted in the betterment for our country. So once again, thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you all today. I really enjoyed this time. Thank you and God bless.
I'd like now to introduce our speaker for the first session. And David Henderson is retired professor emeritus professor from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. My father actually attended the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School, so that has automatically given me a link. I actually spent 1 year before I have any memory of it in Monterey. Monterey is not a place one wants to forget, right? But I didn't remember it. So I immediately, my ears immediately perked up the first time I was ever in a room with David and heard that he was a professor at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School, and have been fascinated by his public work ever since. We share a number of academic issues, but as well, but we both have an interest in encouraging and fostering economic freedom, and he's been a very vocal advocate for that, both in his written and public work. David, I'm just going to turn it over to you at this point because we took some of your time already with other things. So.
Thanks, Ross. My talk today is titled, "The Power to Regulate is the Power to Destroy." There was a famous Supreme Court justice, you've probably all heard of him, named Justice John Marshall, who said the power to tax is the power to destroy. Well, my mentor at UCLA, where I got my PhD, Harold Demsetz, gave a speech when I was 19 years old at the University of Winnipeg. I grew up in Canada, And he said, just as the power to tax is the power to destroy, the power to regulate is the power to destroy. And I want to get into some of that. A couple of things about my background really quick. Where do I go? This is how to reach me. I'll put that back right at the end, but if you want to reach me, all you have to remember is I was born in the middle of the century. My name's David Henderson, and my middle initial is R, and you can reach me. Where am I aiming this? Okay, there we are. My background, I was the senior economist for health policy with Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors for 2 years, and my second year there, I took on the energy portfolio. And here's me with the man. I'm the guy on the right, by the way. And also, I just thought I'd show you, and this is probably what I'm most likely to be remembered for, the Concise Encyclopedia of Economics. You can get one cheap online, but you can get every single entry in it free online if you go to the EconLib website. And now I just want to show one of my mentors whom I never studied under, but really had a huge impact on me. And, where am I aiming? There? Aha. Do you recognize the bald guy who's actually even shorter than me? That's Milton Friedman. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me get into my topic. I've already said the two things about John Marshall. And now here's the summary of my talk. The bad news is that much regulation destroys. Also, there's no logical stopping point once you have a regulatory agency. The good news is that much deregulation allows for creativity, production, and increased well-being. Now, I come from California. I know I originally come from Canada, but I've lived in California longer than in any other place in my life. And here's, by the way, here's the key to starting a business in California. Oops. There's how you start a business in California. Now, I want to talk about some examples of destructive regulation. Price controls on oil and gasoline, which I knew well, having both studied them and written about them. Housing, with all the restrictions on getting permits and things like rent controls. Occupational licensing, which is a big deal in Arizona. I'm going to talk about that as well. And airlines and trucking, where the good news is that we got a lot of deregulation. So first of all, price controls on oil and gasoline. In 1971, President Richard Nixon imposed price controls on the whole economy. It was called a price freeze. You were not allowed to raise a single price or wage. And that lasted 90 days. Then they went to what's called phase two, and then they loosened up a little, but the government had the say on every single price in America and every single wage in America. Now, what can go wrong? Everything. If the supply of something falls, what do you expect to happen to the price? It's supposed to go up. What happens if the price doesn't go up? Well, people are willing to provide less, the supply fell, and at that price, people are still demanding what they were demanding, and so you get a shortage. Well, OPEC raised the price of oil in the fall of 1973 from $3 a barrel to $11 a barrel. The world price almost quadrupled over a few months. But the price controls did not allow the price to go up, and therefore we got shortages and lineups. This happened about a year after I moved to the United States. It was like welcome, right? And we had to line up for our gasoline. Now, there's another economist who's kind of relevant here when we think about the effects of price controls and, of course, other controls, but I want to focus on that. An economist named Ludwig von Mises. Who here has heard of Ludwig von Mises? All right, okay. Mises, his insight was that one regulation causes problems. You regulate, you cause problems. There are two ways to go. Deregulate and get rid of the problem you caused, or regulate in other ways to deal with the problem you just caused with that first regulation. And they tend to go the second way. And I want to talk about that in the case of gasoline. So when we got gasoline price controls, there was a long-run effect. The short-run effect was these shortages. The long-run effect was restrictions on the kind of cars we could buy. So you had people facing an artificially low price of gasoline, acting as if they're facing an artificially low price of gasoline. That's amazing. So they weren't buying more fuel-efficient cars. So the government says, well, we're not going to deregulate the price of gasoline. We're going to regulate the fuel economy of cars. And that's how we got CAFE. That's not the stuff you're drinking right now. That stands for Corporate Average Fuel Economy. And when they imposed CAFE in the Ford administration, they set over the number, an increasing number over the years that had to be the average fuel economy an individual company's cars as a whole had to meet. And that caused some short-run bad effects, deaths. What's the easiest way to get fuel economy when you have a few years to adjust? Reduce the mass, reduce the weight of the car. And two economists, one at Brookings, one at Harvard, calculated that the 1989 model, over its lifetime, would cause between 2,100 and 3,900 deaths due to cafe, Crandall and Graham. So that's the kind of problem you get. When you regulate, it causes a problem, and then you try to regulate to deal with the problem rather than deregulate. The next thing I want to turn to is housing restrictions. And here's how I think of housing restrictions. Lilliputian tying down Gulliver. You have, and I come from California, as I mentioned, and we have one of the worst situations because it is so difficult to get a permit to build a house. You have problems at the local level. You have all kinds of neighbors saying, we don't want more density. You have problems at the state level with the state governments restricting in various ways, and it's very hard to get permission. And there's an economist who's married to the woman who just won the Nobel Prize in Economics, Claudia Golden, named Lawrence Katz. And he was the star economics undergrad at Berkeley in 1981. And he got to give a speech at graduation. And he devoted his whole speech to explaining to the audience why house prices in California had been going along kind of even with the rest of the country and then were going up all through the 70s. And it was basically, it wasn't rocket science, it was simple supply and demand. Even back in the 70s, we were starting to see serious restrictions on building. So, of course, that has some effects. It affects prices and rents. And you look at housing prices in San Francisco, where my daughter lives, and rents a studio apartment for $2,400 a month. And you wonder, well, isn't that because land is so scarce in San Francisco? No, that's not it. It's because housing is so scarce in San Francisco, and there's a difference. First of all, if you ever go to San Francisco, look around, and you'll see out in the Richmond district, the inner Richmond, the outer Richmond, the inner Sunset, the outer Sunset, all kinds of single-family houses and very few apartment blocks, and no high-rise apartment blocks. They just don't allow them. This economist at Harvard named Edward Glaser and an economist at Wharton named Joseph Giorco came up with a very clever methodology that led to the conclusion that it's not the scarcity of land that causes high prices, it's the scarcity of housing permits. So what they did was they looked at two essentially similar houses, locations similar and so on, where one had way more land than the other, but there was only one house. And at the time of their study, it sold for $10,000 to $20,000 more. But if there was an additional permit with that land, it was an extra $100,000 to $200,000. So it's the permits, it's the scarcity of permits that cause the high prices, not the scarcity of land. Now, there is some potentially good news on housing, even in California. We've heard a lot about NIMBY, not in my backyard. We now actually have YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. And even the state government in we live in essentially a one-party state in California, but even the state government in California is starting to try to deregulate to allow more things at the local level. Things like ADUs, auxiliary dwelling units, where you don't need to get much permission at all. So we are seeing some good news in that area. The other, another area where a lot is bad, but a lot is going right, is occupational licensing. There are over 800 occupations in the United States for which, at least in one state, there's a regulation saying that you have to get government permission if you want to practice in that profession. About 30% of the labor force is now in such jobs, up from 5% in 1950. And a Brookings study that I found when I was preparing this gives examples of occupations in which you need licenses in many states. Florists, makeup artists, locksmiths, hair braiders, manicurists, upholsterers, ballroom dance instructors. Yeah, we can't have ballroom dance instructors not licensed. I mean, wouldn't that be terrible? You might make a wrong step. Manicurists, interior designers, travel guides. Now, there's some bad effects, as you might expect, of occupational licensing. It keeps people out. And one of my examples in California is firefighters. If you're a prisoner in a California prison and there's a fire, they will sometimes take prisoners and let them out temporarily to fight the fire. Those same prisoners, when their prison term is up and they're out, cannot legally become firefighters ever because they have a prison record. That just makes no sense to me. Also, it affects wages. Kleiner and Kruger, two economists, Morris Kleiner and Alan Kruger, found that wages in businesses, in the occupations where you have occupational licensing, tend to be about 14% higher on average. Now, you might say that's good, but remember why that happens. It's because supply is restricted. So yes, those people lucky enough to have those jobs are in good shape, but it keeps people from climbing the economic ladder. It keeps a lot of people out who would have been able to get into those occupations. And of course, it causes higher prices. And there's also an effect on mobility. Different states have different rules. And so you are a practicing psychologist in New Jersey, and you want to move to California. This isn't a made-up example. I talked to someone on the phone, on the plane yesterday, who had this exact story about one of her colleagues. When she moves to California, she's got to do some serious stuff. It's not just signing a form. It's certain kind of training and exams. I said, did this person learn anything new? And she goes, no, it's just slowed down the transition. Now, Alan Kruger was one of the authors of one of these major studies. And I was on NPR with him back in the Obama administration, and we were talking about inequality. And I said that one of the contributors to inequality, one of the things making it hard for people starting out to get somewhat higher wages, and if they got somewhat higher wages, inequality would be somewhat less, was occupational licensing, which, as I said, has these effects, keeping people out. And Kruger said kind of reluctantly, yeah, maybe. And I had in mind this study I'd read, but I'd forgotten who'd done it. And I came back to my office and looked up the study, and Kruger was the co-author. What do you mean, yeah, maybe? You're the one who said it. Now, what about the idea of licensing to assure quality? Well, here's what I call the smell test. Who's pushing for licensing? Is it consumers worried about quality? I've never seen such a case. It's typically people in the occupation who either already are qualified or who would be grandfathered in who want to restrict entry of competitors. And we have some interesting empirical data from the case of roofers after Hurricane Francis in 2004 in Florida. So the idea here is the sophisticated argument people make on the quality issue is that there's asymmetric information. We, the consumers, don't know much. Producers know, but of course they're not going to tell if they're not very good. And so that would be the argument. But Governor Jeb Bush at the time, when Hurricane Francis was happening, loosened the restrictions on roofers so people could come in from other states and immediately get approved to do roofing. And the complaints I should have said probably cause. The complaints with probable cause rose by 1.1%. In other words, there was almost no impact on people's complaining about the quality of roofers. And here's what's striking about that here's where you have the most likely case where you're going to get fly-by-night operators because they come in, they're there temporarily, they don't have nearly the same incentive to establish a reputation, and guess what? Complaints hardly went up at all. More typically, you have people who are there for a while, and so you should have even a better situation when you have people able to practice and establish a reputation. Now, there's some good news here. Universal license recognition. Arizona introduced that in 2019. And the idea, and New Hampshire in 2023, although it's not quite as good. But the idea is that you say, okay, if you have a license in another state, you can come here and apply, and it's not pro forma exactly, but it's close to pro forma. It's close to, you'll get it pretty quickly. And we've even got, and by the way, one of the attractions in me coming here was I would be in the same room as one of my favorite governors. Well, that isn't going to happen. But I did find a great quote from him that I thought just laid out the case very nicely. He said, "Just because somebody packs up that moving van in Chicago, Illinois, they don't lose their skills on the way to the state of Arizona. Why should somebody have to suffer the burden of thousands of dollars or weeks or months of recertification in a skill that they already have?" I thought he said it well. And we're starting to see some really good effects of deregulation in Arizona. Between 2019 and early 2023, the number of contractors who applied and got certified was 2,277. Cosmetologists, 980. Physician assistants, pretty important, 591. For all occupations, 6,557. If you want to go and find out more of the data, that was from Heather Curry, who's at the Goldwater Institute, which is here in Arizona. And I just also want to do a shout out to a hero in this whole area, which is the Institute for Justice. They're based in DC, and they go around the country and they find people who are prevented from being in various occupations, and they go to court and get them to be allowed. One of their biggest victories was on cornrow braiding. I don't know if you're familiar with cornrow braiding, but in cornrow braiding, there are no chemicals. And there were many states where cornrow braiders had to go to cosmetology school. And one of the main things they're supposed to learn was how to use chemicals. Why learn that if you're not going to use them? And they've managed to loosen that up in a number of states. Another area where there were some good effects, well, no, actually I want to focus on something that I find kind of blood-curdling in a way, but really important to realize because it's true. Here's a quote from Stephen Carter, and I'll tell you in a minute who he is. "Law professors and lawyers instinctively shy away from considering the problem of law as violence. Every law is violent. We try not to think about this, but we should. On the first day of law school, I tell my contract students never to argue for invoking the power of law, except in a cause for which they are willing to kill. They are suitably astonished and often annoyed. But I point out that even a breach of contract requires a judicial remedy, and if the breacher will not pay damages, the sheriff will sequester his house and goods, and if he resists the forced sale of this property, the sheriff might have to shoot him." This is Stephen Carter, who's a professor of law at Yale University. Now, I want to get to some deregulation successes, but I want to point out the biggest restriction on the biggest regulation on labor markets, and that is immigration restrictions. We have way less competition in our labor markets than we would have if we didn't have such restrictions on immigration. The gains to eliminating restrictions on immigration amount to large fractions of world GDP, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude larger than the gains from dropping all remaining restrictions on international flows of goods and capital. When it comes to policies that restrict immigration, there appear to be trillion-dollar bills on the sidewalk just waiting to be picked up. And I loved what that congressman said, Congressman Siscomanti. He gets that. He came from another country. He gets that. Now I want to turn to some deregulation successes at the federal level. And the 2 that I have in mind that I know a lot about are airlines and trucking. Airline deregulation. Here's the setting. From 1938, when the federal government started restricting entry into the airline business, till 1978, there were no new entrants into the airline business nationwide. When you wanted to get a route, you had to apply to the Civil Aeronautics Board, and they sometimes said no, and they'd sometimes said no when competitors didn't want competition. When you wanted to raise or cut a price, you had to go to the Civil Aeronautics Board and give them 30 days notice. That gave your competitors 30 days to weigh in and say, we don't want you to be able to lower that price. So essentially, the Civil Aeronautics Board ran an airline cartel, kept prices high. There's a saying that I kind of formulated based on something that an economist named George Stigler said, and that is, competition is a hardy weed, not a delicate flower. So you did have competition in the airline business. They just couldn't compete on fares. How did they compete? With frequency, by having more frequency, which meant less full flights. There was a famous jingle for Delta, and I'm going to sing it. Delta is ready when you are. And airlines typically filled half their planes, and they competed with meals. And I remember my transportation professor at UCLA talked about this. He flew on a flight from LA to Chicago, a 747, and there was a pianist on board playing the piano. That's one way they competed. And so, yeah, so you got some benefits, but you paid for them. So along came this guy, an economics professor at Cornell University named Alfred Kahn. And Kahn had no plan right at the start to deregulate. He was constrained by law. But here's what he said. I don't know if he said it, but this clearly fits what he did. He must have asked himself, how far can I go to deregulate without breaking the law? Well, how far do you go? Someone wants a route, you say yes. Someone wants to cut a fare, you say yes. And so he got a lot of deregulation before the Congress passed the law. And then there was a senator from Massachusetts named Kennedy, you might have heard of him, Ted Kennedy, who made that his issue. And he pushed for deregulation, and we got deregulation. It was a bipartisan move to deregulate airlines. And we started getting more entry, we started getting fares falling, and so on. So, airline fares, inflation adjusted, fell by 25% between 91 and 99. And when figures are adjusted for changes in quality and amenities, passengers save, and this was old data, so it's probably higher now, save $19.4 billion per year from airline deregulation. We got similar effects from trucking deregulation. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk much about that. I will just say that before trucking deregulation, if you want to ship a good from point A to point B, you had to get permission. If you wanted then to fill up your truck and come back from B to A, you had to get permission, and sometimes they wouldn't give it. So you had a whole lot of empty trucks driving around the United States. Deregulation ended that. We got much lower prices, much more consumer satisfaction. I won't go through all the data. Regulation has, oops. No, it's not your break. What did I do? Regulation has effects on innovation and progress. To the extent you have to get permission, things slow down. So there's this famous economist, and here's a picture of me with him, named Friedrich Hayek. I'm the one with the dark hair. And he wrote a famous article in 1945 called The Use of Knowledge in Society. And the term that we use that he never used to talk about his insight is local knowledge. Now, what he laid out was the reason a socialist economy can't work is that the central planners can't know the information that you and I have in our brains, the information that we all have. And the only way you can have that information come to bear is if people get to act on it. Well, that applies not just to prices, which is what he focused on. It applies more generally. It applies to, for example, think of Amazon versus the US Postal Service. Amazon gets lots of information. Postal Service has lots of information. And by the way, the other issue there is not just information, but incentives. The Postal Service has very few incentives to do things well. So one of the things people worry about is the innovators get all the money. You hear a lot about Jeff Bezos. You hear about all these people making all these billions of dollars. Well, there's an economist who won the Nobel Prize a few years ago named William Nordhaus. And what he said was, and by the way, I highlighted this in my Wall Street Journal article on him, and it wasn't even mentioned by the Nobel Prize Committee. But this is one of my favorite studies of his. Only a minuscule fraction of the social returns from technological advances over the 48 to 2001 period was captured by producers, indicating that most of the benefits of technological change are passed on to consumers rather than captured by producers. How minuscule? 2.2%. So 97.8% of the gains go to us. Now, you might think, well, I'm completely against all regulations. I want to just address that quickly. Does it follow that we should have zero regulation? No, it does not. There are things called externalities, and I'm particularly thinking of the negative ones, where something you do hurts other people, but you don't take account of it. And so if those externalities are big enough, that can justify regulation. Can I think of an example of regulation that I think was very good? Yes, I can. Lead in gas. I think it was great that the EPA required that they take lead out of gas. But that doesn't mean that all regulation is good. I've laid out a whole bunch that aren't. And so here are some questions to ask when you're contemplating regulation. Is there an externality? Is there another kind of market failure? How big a problem is it? What is my goal? Are there other ways to achieve the goal? What are the likely costs? What are the likely benefits? Will there be any unintended consequences? And what is the lowest level of government at which it can be handled? So, one of the things people think, well, this guy said it better than me, so I'm just going to show it. There's an economist named Arnold Harberger. He's an amazing man. He's almost 100 years old, and he's still teaching. He was very important in the many reforms in Latin America, including Chile. He did not meet with Pinochet, by the way, but his connection with that probably is why he will never get a Nobel Prize, which is really unjust. But anyway, here's what he said about what it takes to make changes, what it takes to make reforms. My long-standing conviction that successful economic policy in developing countries is very far from being the product of pure forces of history, something that happens when it happens because its time has come. He says, far from it. In every case about which I have close knowledge, the policy would in all probability have failed or never got started, but for the efforts of a key group of individuals, and within that group, one or two outstanding leaders. So many of the people in this room are the leaders, and you can have an effect, and we're going to hear from some of them later today. And I just want to end with a graphic that I think shows the ultimate difference between a highly regulated economy and a deregulated economy. And I'll end with this. This is North and South Korea at night. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a few minutes for questions. Are you open to taking a few questions?
Yeah.
Awesome. So just raise your hand, and Emma, one of our staff, will come bring you the mic, and feel free to ask a question.
Yes. Also, could you say your name?
Hi, I'm Barb Dow. I'm wondering, here in Arizona, I know you like Doug Ducey, and you're in favor of him with the 2019 saying, come across the states, which I agree with.
Yep.
But what I don't understand, and I'm sure there's rationale to it, but I can't figure it out, is Doug Ducey said teachers do not need to have a teaching background. They don't need a degree from a university. If you've got blood flowing through your brain and your body, then you can be a teacher. How on earth is that good?
Okay, I don't know the background, but let me tell you the typical degree a teacher has. I know California very well. I assume it's similar here, which is a Bachelor of Education degree, where what you're learning is how to teach. That's what you're apparently learning. And a lot of what they do is go with the latest fads. We sent our daughter to a private school, and I said to my wife in the 90s, we're not going to Europe or Asia this century because we're paying for that private school. And we didn't. I kept my word. And her math teacher was great. You know what his major was? Math. No, you're right. He had a degree. So my point is, well, okay. But now he said there's no state regulation on this, but aren't individual school districts able to pick and choose who they hire?
There's a shortage of teachers, so they're taking anyone who's standing upright.
Okay. And you'd have them not take those people and do what?
I just think teachers, if they're going to teach in a classroom of 30 kids or 45 in this state, then having a university background and a degree would be nice so that we know you can start something and finish something.
Yeah.
And be able to write a paragraph and to be able to, teach a child to write a paragraph.
Okay. And so I'm not going to argue with you because I believe that when I'm ignorant, I should admit it. And I'm ignorant. I don't know the details. Okay. What's your name?
Scott Dow.
Scott.
So my question is on regulation.
On
regulation.
Yeah.
We'll take the CAFE standards, as you brought up the CAFE standards in the automotive industry. From that, now this has taken decades, but from that, the steel industry, because of the requirements of the automotive industry, have advanced. The automotive industry has advanced steel creation and types of steel creation probably faster than any other industry because they want ultra high tensile strength steel, but ultra lightweight at the same time to meet like you said, to meet the requirements of protecting the occupant inside there. So does a regulation like CAFE, or in the space of regulations, can good come from them over time through innovation? So without the CAFE standards, we may not, this is theoretical, we may not have had the desire for ultra lightweight, high tensile steel without those necessary requirements.
I think that's correct, but that doesn't mean it was good.
Okay.
Right? So if I want something in a market, I can go buy it. If I'm showing by my behavior that I don't want it, and millions of consumers are just like me, it will not be produced. So there actually can be too much investment in that. The cars, you can get too high tech because it's expensive, and it would have been cheaper if you hadn't gone that way. And I trust more a whole bunch of auto producers and consumers more than I trust the US government. So that's how I look at it. And by the way, let me just say on that issue, just the whole issue of safety, I've given this other talk where I show in the workplace fatalities per million man hours on the vertical axis and the year on the horizontal axis. And here's how it looks over the 20th century. And then I asked my audience, when was OSHA introduced? OSHA was 1970. Fatalities were falling before OSHA, fatalities fell after OSHA. And the big driver there was not that OSHA, it was that as we get wealthier, we demand more of what economists call normal goods, and safety is a normal good. And if we as workers demand it, and how do we demand it? By insisting on higher pay if it's unsafe, employers will provide it. I know that sounds a little tangential, but I think it's getting at the point that there are a lot of forces in the market leading there. So let's say we got, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 in tensile stuff that you talked about, we might have got to 8 without the regulations because we as wealthier and wealthier consumers demand it.
Hi, Jose Benito Rosales Chavez. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank
I
you.
really like the slide that you have, questions to ask before regulating. My background is in nutrition, health, and so would like to ask about the soda taxes, the sugar tax. Why is it that many governments or people are against this type of tax regulation when if we look at the externalities, what is one of the externalities, and that's the negative effect that it has on health, thinking about chronic diseases, diabetes, obesity, overweight. So I think in New York they tried to pass it, and then it didn't, it was passed, and then it got removed. I know in Mexico they have had it for a while, and it has been successful, and it has shown that it has helped decrease obesity rates, especially among children. But here in the US, what is it that something like this, where we know that there's more negative effects, if we not were to pass this, what is it that it doesn't take place?
Okay, was that a question or were you telling me something?
Question, like what is it that often, like a regulation like this, often, you know, when we know that has a potential positive impact, it doesn't get, it's no longer standing.
Got it. So, so what you're advocating essentially is a tax on sugar or something like that. Guess what? You got your way. We have a tax on sugar. It's called an import quota. The price of sugar in the United States at the wholesale level is double the wholesale price in the rest of the world. Why? Because the US government seriously restricts imports of sugar from other countries. And so the price is already very high. Now, I don't think you're getting what you want. And so just as you wouldn't get what you want with an explicit tax, because how do people substitute? They substitute with corn syrup. That's how they do it. That's why the Coca-Cola you're going to get back at the back of the room isn't as good as the Coca-Cola you can get in Mexico or Canada, okay? And so, and that's why Lifesavers moved from Michigan to Quebec, because one of their big inputs is sugar, and it was too expensive in the United States. So people substitute. So that quota didn't have this huge effect on children's obesity in the United States. Okay, thank you.